G'day, Aisha Mahari here. So, number one about BPD triggers is that each and every single trigger that a person with borderline personality disorder experiences is a rupture. Okay, it's a rupture between, in various different ways, the connection of them kind of seeking, unconsciously seeking identity through you, in a sense trying to be one with you, merge with you, have you be prioritizing them and giving them all this time and attention, and they need it because it's about trying to find identity for them through other, meaning you. And so when they do get triggered to the emotional dysregulation that causes the splitting defense, etc., and a whole other host of things, it's because they are, in a sense, very deeply unconsciously struggling with a feeling of annihilation, that they feel like they are not really who they, like they're losing a tether to a sense of identity. And every BPD trigger, every last single one of them with any significance, maybe not the most minor one or something, every single BPD trigger is like I said, a rupture. Rupture to communication, rupture to the relating, rupture to feeling like things are okay, so split to devaluation, BPD defenses kick in, you're getting blamed, accused, giving silent treatment, screamed at, whatever the case might be. BPD triggers are relational communication ruptures because people with BPD untreated or not diagnosed, or they are diagnosed, and there are people out there, ladies and gentlemen, diagnosed with BPD and they don't even know that they have it. When you take all this into consideration and the fact of rupture and repair in relationships, when people with BPD are triggered, it's a rupture. And that's how you end up in the jade conversation of, justify, argue, defend, explain. That's where the partner ends up, or the parent of a person with BPD, or the adult child of a person with BPD. This is not where people with BPD end up. And so when this rupture happens, every single time they're triggered, it affects you. It often hurts you. And you're trying to discuss it with them. That turns into the jade conversations that can go on for hours for many people, and you never get anywhere. You might think you've gotten somewhere, or they heard you, but then only to find out, no, same trigger comes up again, same pattern. You're hurt again, or whatever happens, you're wounded, you're frustrated, you're not feeling seen, you're not feeling heard because you're not being seen and you're not being heard. So with each trigger is a rupture. And people with BPD, due to lack of identity, unstable sense of identity, unstable sense of self, lack of self, people with BPD do not have any ability, capability, or even understanding that ruptures can be repaired. So people with codependency are trying to repair the rupture. You're trying to get them to hear you. Maybe, you've given up on getting an apology, but lots of people still want apologies. And that can be a type of repair. But when somebody keeps doing the same things over and over again, as triggered borderlines will, especially, like I said, on treated, and maybe they don't even know they have BPD, maybe they're not diagnosed. So it's a rupture, and that's important for you to know and understand what that means, because all your efforts to fix it, to get heard about how it hurt you, or to maybe you're trying to, you're a person with BPD got really triggered, the rupture occurs in the communication, and now it's like they're firing at you, you don't care, you don't love me, etc. And you're just trying to go, you're trying to caretake them. You're like, maybe you're hurt, but maybe you're like, well, no, babe, I still love you. What are you talking about? And then they give you some accusation, like, no, I didn't do that. I didn't say. See how you end up justifying, arguing, defending, explaining, just like that? And what are these BPD triggers that are ruptures that they can't repair, that you work so hard to repair, but you don't really ever get there? It accrues for you. Not accruing for them. It's sort of like it just comes and goes, whatever it is. They don't understand. It's sort of like a toddler or a young child. When something is complicated and difficult and needs to be discussed, let's say between two parents or a parent and an older sibling, that little kid isn't going to care what's going on, right? Or understand what's going on. And so the other part of this rupture factor is it also leads to each and every single BPD trigger that affects you in whichever ways it does, that you try to explain it to them and you're trying to repair something. Repair a communication, repair a break in a relationship, repair a really rough weekend, repair a horrible day, repair maybe 2 weeks of like it's horrible. When you try to do that, you don't succeed, really. Not really, because it'll come back around and around and around and around again. And what is that besides? So every BPD trigger is not only a rupture, that they have no ability to help you, to join with you, to try to repair. It's also every BPD trigger. These triggers are inside. They are internally inside people with BPD and why they react to what they react. Lack of self, lack of unstable sense of identity, really have an identity. They're trying to seek that through you. So for the borderline in the relationship, not always consciously, but everything is always about what about me? Like you're saying whatever you're saying and you're trying to maybe think about you want them to stop hurting you in a certain way. But they don't hear that because everything for them is what about me? Because they don't know who they are. So then they're unconsciously trying to get the sense of identity and self through you. And then when you're not mirroring them anymore, which you can hardly mirror a borderline for that long before there's going to be a trigger and a rupture. So with these ruptures that every trigger really causes, then what also is happening with BPD triggers, you need to realize that you work so hard, so many people with codependency probably right now, in some justify, argue, defend, explain, circular conversation with somebody with BPD going, no, I didn't do that. No, I didn't say that. No, I didn't mean that. But like, how come you did this? And when you did this, it really hurt me. And the person with BPD goes, I don't know what you're talking about. And last Thursday you did this. And you're always doing this. And get off my back. And they just don't hear you. It's like a wall goes up. So that's what happens. BPD triggers lead to the rupture instantaneously, leads to all these issues. And the other thing about BPD triggers that you really need to understand, when people with BPD are triggered and they get to these ruptures and they can't repair them, and you try, but you can't repair them by yourself, so they don't get repaired. There's no closure to each and every one of these episodes in any relationship. And they're accruing on you maybe more than you're aware of right now. And the damage. And that's how you lose yourself so much. And it's crazy making. And not only is it the rupture and everything I've just said, but these triggers are internal to the person, to every person with BPD. So you don't cause them to be triggered. But they will tell you in a heartbeat, oh, well, you just said this, and so now I'm triggered. Or don't do that. Or how come you're talking to me about my mother? Don't you know I need a trigger warning before you talk about my mother? I need a trigger warning before you talk about... Whatever the case is, the triggers are inside of them. The triggers are there, dysregulated response. The triggers are there being subconsciously thrown back into repetition compulsion cycles from things that have happened to them in the past, usually in childhood. So there's going to be no closure, no resolution. There's a rupture every time they're triggered. And the other key thing is you really need to stop trying to repair those ruptures from the triggers, etc., because it doesn't get done and you don't get closure, episode or trigger after trigger after trigger. And the other thing about these triggers to remember is people with BPD's triggers are internal. You don't cause it. They'll tell you in a heartbeat, you just triggered me and now I feel like this. And yeah. No, you didn't. Any more than anybody, because you see, we as adults, we hope, right, that more of us than not, we learn how to regulate our own emotions. And what does that mean? Can people without BPD be triggered? Sure. But it's not the same as people with BPD being triggered. Why? Because, and people with codependency can struggle with this somewhat to varying degrees. Different people can be triggered and have some emotional dysregulation issues too, especially if you have PTSD along with codependency or some other issues there. And the thing is that when somebody could say something to me really rotten, like happens online all the time, and I could look at it and go, oh, like, or for a second I might go, wow, that's pretty rough or whatever, because I don't really take it in. But then I regulate my emotions and I'm like, whatever, like, that's that person's whatever, it doesn't matter to me. But when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're loving them and you're fighting to make this thing work, it's just that every trigger that a borderline experiences, which is not you triggering them, it's happening within them. It is a rupture. It is something they can't repair and they won't acknowledge, and it really damages each and every time a relationship and communication, but accruingly so for the loved one, the partner, or the person with codependency. But BPD triggers, make no mistake about it, every single time they're triggered, it's a rupture, and they don't know how to repair the ruptures at all. So you're going to be extra caretaking for that person with BPD and trying to resolve something that is from a BPD trigger that you can't repair because they have no ability to meet you there to try to repair anything. And these are episodes upon episodes to the millions in relationships with people with BPD that provide you no closure. There's nothing being built back up, and you are definitely on your own. And they are definitely needing and demanding from you and blaming you at the same time. You see how these relationships are no-win impossibility, and especially around the triggers in borderline personality disorder. BPD triggers are highly subjective to people, each person with BPD. BPD triggers don't allow for any objectivity. People with BPD don't know how to check things out. Like, gee, I'm feeling this way. You just said that. Could it be that maybe it isn't exactly what you said, but like, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? So BPD triggers are crazy making for people who are close to someone with BPD, and they don't make any sense. They really hurt you, and the person with BPD doesn't even get what's happening, consciously or unconsciously, hard to say, often unconsciously, because again, they don't have a self from which to relate to other, meaning you, meaning hearing or understanding how they impact you. Most people with BPD, until unless really significantly treated, etc., and I know that sounds vague, are not going to understand what you're trying to tell them about the rupture of the trigger or about everything I just mentioned about what happens to you when they're triggered, the rupture and the crazy making aspect of how they can't hear you. They don't take any accountability or responsibility, and you're just left there holding it yourself, and how there's no closure to the episode of any BPD trigger. And so it is crazy making beyond a shadow of a doubt, because these triggers are not reflective of shared reality. It doesn't mean people with BPD don't have the ability to, in other situations, definitely, have better reality testing or shared reality. But as soon as they're triggered, no, suddenly it has to do with something coming back to the here and now, like coming into the here and now from their past. So the crazy making reality, when you're close to somebody with BPD or you love somebody with BPD in any relationship type, is when they're triggered, it gets automatically crazy making, because it is their cognitive distortions. It is their all or nothing black and white thinking. It's their inability to see what's really happening for you or what happened in between them and you, how they impacted you. Or if they do, for some reason, get triggered by what you say. But again, their triggers are internal. So unless you say something really with malice or really to hurt somebody, then you're not likely to be the cause of the borderline's trigger or any trigger. But the thing is, they'll say that you are, because they don't know what's triggering them. They don't know why. And so they depart, however, like for short periods of time, They're back in the repetition compulsion cycle unconsciously of what the trigger brings up inside of all of their dysregulated emotion, which they're not really usually aware of. They get lost in all that emotion. They're going to blame you right away. And the fact is, it's not, when people with BPD are triggered and the rupture happens and there's no closure, going to be no closure about most triggers, when people with BPD experience and you're trying to get heard and etc., it's crazy making, because it's just simply a communication and relational impossibility for them to really understand how you feel, because they're too busy inside themselves drowning in all this dysregulated emotion, which doesn't mean it's ever okay if they treat you poorly and when they can't apologize and when they don't take accountability. So to the here and now, BPD triggers are often unrelated to what's going on in the present. And because they're being triggered in the here and now, but in a dissociative way that's from the past, happening unconsciously, where they then start reacting in repetition compulsion ways. And that's why it's crazy making, and that's why it makes no sense.